Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the show that explores how we can upgrade our lead generation. I'm so glad you've joined us for this show. We're continuing our advanced lead generation series. That's where we talk with experts and learn ways to up the effectiveness of our digital marketing. And we're going to continue this all the way through the spring. Let's boot up today's show, which is about sales qualification. Do you remember being a kid at the amusement park? And I remember when I would go, the thing that was really on my radar were those signs right by the entry of a particular Ferris wheel or roller coaster, and it would have a line on it and say, you must be this tall to go on this ride. Remember those? Well, this closely parallels a key part of all complex sales out there. And it's a part that not all marketers know about. It's called qualification. So think about how marketing works when they get a lead. It kind of caps off their piece of the process, and they maybe give high fives all around and it goes off to sales. But for sales, it's far from the end. It's actually the beginning of their work with the lead. And the main question that sales has to answer is this buyer capable of buying from us? Are they tall enough to ride this ride? And the process of answering that question requires a rep to do all kinds of offline research, as well as having one or several conversations with the lead. In larger sales, where multiple internal people are needed, the lead may not progress to involve anyone else if it doesn't get past this rep who spoke to them and who determines that they're a sales qualified lead. Now, the process varies depending on the company, but in all cases, it takes a little bit of human intuition to do it, and it takes really good conversation skills. There's a whole art to it. To get a salesperson's perspective on how to do this, I'll be speaking with someone who is passionate about getting on the phone and helping companies fill a pipeline with qualified leads that drive sales. Let's go get into that discussion.
My guest is someone who has years of experience in sales development. He's worked in verticals like IT managed services, marketing agencies. He is one passionate guy about driving sales, and he does this by filling up the pipelines of companies with lots of qualified leads. And I wanted to bring him on so that he could tell us how he does this. In fact, he's got a reputation for it. He's actually even got a nickname that alludes to the fact that he does so much sales. So let's hear from today's guest. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hey, Glenn, thank you for having me. It's Martin MacArthur, the outbound sales guy. Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. And I love it that you are so strong in this that you even got a nickname. Your reputation precedes you, Martin.
Oh, right on. Thank you. I'm not sure about that, but I'll take your word for it.
So we decided we were going to talk today about how we qualify prospects and what the ways of doing this are and how we should actually think about qualification. Qualification is one of these parts where it sits in sales domain, and you guys know it really well. It's quite recent to the marketing world. And in some ways, I think sometimes we actually aren't even talking about the same thing when we're looking at the funnel that we're bringing people in through. So maybe if we could start with you telling me how you look at the funnel, and when you think of finding a prospect that you will eventually qualify, how do you think of them actually coming to you, or how do you think of you going out to them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way that I perceive the funnel is that there, the company that I was with previously, the sales developers talk a lot about this, the funnel above the funnel. So I think there's an area that kind of lies right at the very top of the funnel, and you need to first of all figure out who do you want to be talking to, and really identify that, because a lot of times people have this this notion of, okay, I've got this really cool product or service, and it can, everyone's really a good fit for it, where indeed that's not necessarily the case. So I think first off, you got to figure out who really fits your actual ideal customer profile, customer persona, swim lane, whatever you want to call it. And then once you figure that out, then you can start to identify, how am I going to go out and find these folks? And then you start to generate these conversations on whichever channel, right? And that can be a topic for another day. But once you figure out, okay, how am I going to reach out to my prospect, that is when you start to enter into the funnel of the top of the funnel in prospecting, figuring out, okay, this is the person I want to be talking to. This is what I want to say to them. And in fact, are you a good fit? And are you even within a buying window? Like, is this a good time for us to even have a conversation? Or are you 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the journey from even there being an issue, a pain, problem to even be discussing?
Yes, I think that buying window is the most important concept that can help marketers understand sales and vice versa. So if we look over at how marketers talk about funnels and top of funnel, they will include even the most light touch, like a casual brush in with your brand on social media. And so, while they're thinking that that person is interested, they're only going to be able to find out if that person is in a buying window by getting them down into some hard-hitting questions or looking at content that is exactly about if you're going to buy now. And I think that's probably where sales begins their conversation. There's no point talking before we get down to the point of asking a prospect that. And we have to remember that the prospects are out there on a journey to take care of their problems. I guess they've got both options, right? They can sit around, receive an incoming inquiry from a salesperson, and then tell them, yeah, actually, I'm in a buying window right now, and, let's talk. Or they can lean forward and type into Google, I'm looking for a solution to this problem, and your website comes up, and they can self-select. And the difference I know in marketing and sales is we normally call those two things outbound and inbound leads. But the buying window is the main definition that determines where this all goes, right? Whether we actually have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I can reach out to you today via an outbound touch, outbound cadence, whatever that's going to be. And I can contact you today and say, hey, Glenn, this is what we're doing. Do you have any interest today? Do you have some interest to learn about a new process, new offering, whatever the case is? You may come back with, well, hey, we actually just entered into an agreement 3 weeks ago with your competitor. Okay, that's perfectly fine. Let's stay on each other's radar. Let's enter into a underlying contract, if you will, of let's stay engaged. Right. Let's connect on social. Let's enter into marketing and sales funnel so that we're both on each other's radar for when the time arises that you're either no longer satisfied, you want to look at something else, whatever the case is. There's a whole host of signals if we're engaged for me then to I reference again, 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road of you showing signs in intent of, hey, let's pick up that conversation that we were going to have back when you reached out.
Perfect. Recording of those signals and even the act of qualifying itself. Let's talk about that for a minute. I think marketers would be interested to know how sales does this and why they do it. And I think it becomes kind of clear if you zoom up to, let's say, what a sales manager has to think about in terms of the bandwidth of people who are spending their days on the phone. But, maybe you can just give your perspective on what is qualifying important for? What is its actual purpose for a sales team, for a salesperson themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the end of the day, whether it's marketing, sales, whoever it is, right? Like at the end of the day, what really matters is revenue, right? So qualification helps you eventually get to revenue. If you're doing a great job of qualification, whether you're sitting on the marketing side of the house or the sales side of the house, you're going to know if this prospect, if this opportunity is going to lead to a revenue generating activity, right? So what I mean by that is, is this going to go to an opportunity stage? Is this opportunity going to go to a close stage? And then is this going to lead to a long-term mutually beneficial relationship where, yes, the company is generating revenue, they're hitting their revenue and sales goals, the sales rep is earning their commission, but on top of that, it's just a great experience for the customer that is entering into that process and journey with the company.
What I'm hearing you say is it helps ensure that everybody's time is well used and that nobody's wasting it.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you are, what you do, like whether you're a sales professional, marketing professional, revenue leader, whoever, time is valuable. And your prospect, especially, their time is valuable because you're reaching out to them, I'm reaching out to them. They have a plethora of people reaching out to them, right? Craving their attention, and they just simply don't have enough time in the day to provide that attention to everyone that's reaching out to them, and then also continue to do their daily job and their daily tasks. Right? Yeah. There's just simply not enough hours in the day.
And there's okay. Like we want to distinguish. So let's take the situation where you're reaching out to people. You've got the time as a salesperson that you're already spending prospecting, and that's time consuming. And then once you do have someone who's interested in talking, you put the qualifying there in a way because there's a fair bit of time that you would need to invest if you're moving to a proposal, if it's a proposal where there's a fair bit of configuration involved, right? So it's like each of these steps is trying to be gated and make sure that only the people who really belong at the next step get there. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing with qualification is who's all involved in the process. Is it a single purchaser or is there a committee? Especially if you're looking at a larger organization, like you may have multiple stages of qualification that you have to go through. So if you're not going through a process, it's got to be a mechanical process almost, right? Of, okay, if I'm speaking to this person, these are the types of questions I need addressed. Then, who else do we need to include? Do we need to include a VP? Do we need to include procurement, HR? What's the steps that in order to end up getting this to an opportunity, then to a closed won opportunity, and then proposal and onward to a signed agreement. And then also included in that qualification, as mechanical as it needs to be, it also just needs to be a conversation, right? It's kind of like a ping pong match, right? Like tennis match. I serve you a question. You're going to take that question, you're going to process it, you're going to formulate your response, then you're going to serve me, right? And then it's a back and forth, but it's not an interrogation, right? I'm not going to be like asking you 10 questions and that's it. I got all my answers. Thanks, I'm on my way.
And that, ping pong metaphor is so good because what is abundantly clear once you start doing sales, you notice that you're now getting down to questions that can only be done interactively. This is not like you can research up something about the buying window inside of a company on the internet. You actually have to go and talk. And even the questions you said about, well, how many conversations will I be having with how many people inside of the buyer's organization? That's detective work. And you have to kind of talk to them a little bit like a detective who's investigating a case and collect information. And that's going to take you down different paths, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you may find out something along that journey that's a red flag, and in your process, you're going to be like, okay, well, after this stage of qualification, Mr. Prospect, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for us to continue down this journey because X, Y, Z.
Sure. And let's remember that the actual name Qualify has that baked into it. I know from CRMs that you will have usually a status if you hit that point with somebody where you will mark them as disqualified. Yep. So, we can see how this process really is a gate, and it will allow a company to only get the people who need or who meet the criteria to be able to, take the time for a pitch or a proposal. Martin,
I would add to that, don't be afraid to disqualify somebody, because if you go down this journey and process of qualifying somebody and there's red flags being thrown up, and you go ahead anyhow and send over a proposal and you happen to win that opportunity, you're not serving that prospect with the best intent. You're only looking at the transactional value, and you're also, okay, I've made my commission, now on to the next person. Where if you go through this journey and this process and there's concerns, you need to stop and disqualify that prospect.
The quality salespeople I know always act that way. And as people get to know what sales does more, they have a better appreciation how sales will only do themselves in and shoot themselves in the foot if they bring on a customer that is not a good fit. So when people have this skeptical view of sales, of sweet talking people into something that they don't want, they couldn't be more wrong if they tried. And I know that in a good number of situations, a salesperson has a account management or a strategic account review role once the client comes on. So they see very clearly that it's only logical for them to be rigorous on qualifying and making sure that at both ends of the deal, it makes sense.
Absolutely.
When we look at the actual questions that you ask, there are some really old qualification frameworks out there. I suppose the most famous one is BANT. I would love to hear you talk about that, or just any other ways that you normally assemble the questions, or what order you ask them in. How do you kind of think of this series of things that you might branch down into with someone when you've got them on the phone? Just tell me a little bit about how you do that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think you still need to keep, as outdated and inadequate as BANT is, you're still using it, right? You may not be using it the way that it was intended for, but you still need to know that the person you're speaking with has budget, right? They have they have the funds and finances to make a purchase, And more than likely, if they don't, and this is a solution that they really need, it addresses their pain point, they're going to go out, they're going to find a way to get those funds, right? So you need to make sure that you're speaking to the actual decision maker, and that goes back to what I mentioned before, right? Do you have all the right people in the process, in the room to be speaking with and making those decisions? Timing is a major factor. Like, is this something that you guys are looking at today? Is it going to be a pressing matter 3 months down the road, 12 months down the road? Again, going back to that buyer window, yes. Right? So there's really, when it comes to qualifying, again, it's really more focused around the prospect, understanding from previous conversations, what's the actual time frame, who else do we need to include, and who's going to be able to release those funds. Okay. So it does drive back to BANT, even though, yeah, you're not really going through the BANT type question.
Sure. And
I hope that addresses.
I think so. And we'll include in the show notes, all the spelling out of these acronyms. You've mentioned, though, that it could be several conversations, and that might not be something that marketers are aware of. So you're telling me, if you get into a conversation with someone and at that who else needs to be involved question, or, who can answer the sales rep's questions, they'll say, oh, well, Joe's needed. So you're telling me you might actually cap the call there and book another call so that Joe can be on the call and that you guys can continue qualification. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. So if someone else needs to be involved, and I've faced this many times before, you'll have not necessarily a junior person, but you'll have maybe someone who's on the front line, right? Who's going to be in the day-to-day process of whatever the solution is that you're offering. They may be the person tasked reaching out, gathering the information, or that you have a relationship with, and you find out, okay, this is a good fit, but they may not be the final decision maker, right? They may have like if you're talking to a sales for a sales solution, right, you may have to bring in the VP of sales or the CRO who has the final decision. So it's really, you really need to clarify, who else do we need to bring in? Who else needs to be involved in this process? Or a question that I like to ask is, other than yourself, should we be including anyone else in the process as we move along?
Yes. And that's
and what I find is that the person, like that's a very clear question, right? So it's a cut and dry yes, no, yeah, we need to bring in Joe, and who's the VP of sales, to sign off on this.
Yeah, and the question is not trying to bring ego into it, but it is also making sure that you haven't taken something for granted. And in this age of having all of the databases that we have, and marketing automation and different kinds of information, I think it's tempting for us to think we know more than we do about what is actually going on inside of a prospect's organization.
Absolutely, and I think the worst thing that you can do is assume, because if you are only going on assumption, you could be missing out on some very key, vital information that will either qualify or disqualify the prospect.
Yes. Let's talk for a second about the way that marketing might fit in here. I think that if they're doing a good job, then someone that you're on the phone with qualifying, they've at least, had a little bit of a touch point with the brand, and they might even know a little bit about how the company addresses their issues. But for any leads that, even come in through marketing, can you offer any advice for marketers out there that are able to make the life of their sales rep easier, how do you think they could pre-qualify these leads, or even just pass on some information about someone who was on their website 18 times so that the sales rep has a little bit of a better handle on things as they begin their questions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it doesn't really matter. Well, it might matter because, if you're a small company, you may have one person that's doing sales and marketing. But if you have, one person doing sales, one person doing marketing, or sales and marketing teams, I would highly recommend that they sit together, that they're not siloed departments, because marketing and sales, they go hand in hand. So I think they really need to be a cohesive entity. And the way that the marketing can help out the sales side is, having collateral that really speaks to the prospect, to the buyer, and addresses any questions, any concerns that they might be having, because more than likely, like you said off the top, they're going to go to Google, they're going to look up the company, they're going to look up the individual rep, they're going to look up and gather as much information as possible, right? And if marketing's done a great job, they're going to have all the collateral in all the right places that addresses any questions that the prospect's going to have. But also, when you're speaking to a prospect on the sales side, and they say, okay, this all sounds great, and we've qualified a bit, gone through our qualification, and the prospect says, could you send me over some more collateral so that I can pass this along as we're considering this solution. Marketing then needs to have all the collateral for the salesperson just be able to get the right information off at the right time to the prospect.
Yeah, and even if we, as a thought experiment, had marketers imagining what you just said and thinking about what might be on that collateral and then writing it, I know that would be helpful. They should definitely also, if they can, sit with sales. But even if they couldn't, I think that what you've just said there can give them a great leg up in knowing what needs to be on that collateral and how the prospect could be helped so that they move forward to the next conversation. And then if they do qualify, then onto the proposal. And let's kind of finish.
And also one other point that came to me while you were mentioning that is for the marketing and for the sales development rep, the sales team, they should be constantly communicating back and forth. If they're not able to sit together, then there should be a weekly, a monthly, well, definitely a weekly briefing just of, okay, this is what I'm hearing on the front line. Can you make an adjustment to the website or to this piece of collateral so that when I get this question or objection from the prospect, I'm able to get that right back to them.
Yeah, good point. So let's just talk about what that kind of end of process looks like. If somebody has successfully been qualified, what are you basing that on? Do you have in your head maybe a checklist? And, if they say yes to these 4 things, then we're ready to move them into a proposal? Or do you kind of look at it like a score, or do you grade them? What to you defines when something passes qualification?
It's more of a needs analysis when everything. So I've gone through all my qualification questions and perform more of a needs analysis, and the prospect has answered everything to the satisfaction. I've addressed all the questions and concerns for the prospect, then move it on to a next step of proposal. does it make sense for us to move to the next stage and move to a proposal, or if the prospect says, hey, this all looks great, we want to move forward.
Okay, so if I heard you right, what you tried to do when you were deciding if they're ready to go to a proposal is you're looking for a story that fits together. If you satisfied yourself that your company's product is right for them, and it sounds like you've answered all their questions and satisfying that they're ready to move ahead and talk about buying. So thank you. That's a very cool way to just put a bow on all this. So let's switch gears for a minute, Martin, and talk about how you have become the guy who can just do this outbound sales. I think it's clear to anybody listening that you've got a real skill for having these conversations and just doing this. And the fact that you do it at scale, some of us will be used to this from, let's say, job interviews, but you're doing this kind of active investigative questioning all the time. So tell me a little bit about how you came to do this and what do you think gives you this skill?
That's a great question. And for a lot of people who are not connected with me on LinkedIn, who don't know me very well in the Ottawa community, interacted or see me at the LinkedIn locals here in Ottawa, I am totally blind, and I have at a younger age, around the age of 7, I was diagnosed with what's called retinitis pigmentosa. Juvenile retinitis pigmentosa, and basically the retinas in my eyes are detached, and I'm only able to see the difference between really bright light. It's basically like the light that's outside during the daylight and darkness. So, I kind of was figuring out from high school, go to college, what to do. My dad recommended I go into business, and because him and my mom have been small business owners most of my life, and he thought that might be a good path to go down. So I went through for business, and when I moved to Ottawa about 10 years ago, I was looking for a job and applied to a very small new voice over IP company. Okay. And they said, here's a phone. We want you to reach out to businesses and get us meetings. So that's kind of how I started out, and it really evolved from there.
And you are a real user of technology too. I mean, there's amazing assistive technology that allows you to be on exactly the same footing as anybody using a computer and a phone.
Absolutely, yeah. So I use LinkedIn. It's a great tool. I use Apple products, and built into Apple. All of Apple's operating systems as a screen reader, so it will read everything to me as I'm navigating the screen. So it really, sales development really made sense early on, and the biggest takeaway that I would advise anyone is, anything that you do, you just have to commit to it. So sales development is something that that made a lot of sense for me. So I committed to it, and early on I was really scared to pick up the phone and have a conversation with a stranger. And I just my mindset is anything that I want to accomplish, I know that I'll accomplish it. I'll do it very well. So I've just over time have mastered and become better, more resilient, and the biggest thing is just having a conversation and listening. Really, at the end of the day, that's what you're doing.
Yes, it's very important. I think you can't speak for all sighted people, but I think we get distracted, and I think it's hard for us to do something that is like I've heard the difference said between, simple and easy, right? Listening is simple, but it's not easy. It's not easy when you've got a whole lot of other things that could be taking your attention elsewhere. So you are showing that it can really happen. And I'm absolutely sure when I say that prospects that you speak with clearly get the sense that they are the most important thing in your universe when you're talking with them. And I think that that's a huge part of what makes you such a master at what you do.
Absolutely. And, a lot of what I do is about sincerity and about authenticity. You'll notice a lot on LinkedIn. I talk about that. And for me, those aren't buzzwords. Whether I meet you at a networking event, at a local pub or coffee shop, or we're having a back and forth conversation on LinkedIn, it's always going to be the same tone, same person, right? So I think that's the biggest thing that people find is the sincerity.
Yeah. And you're, free to also blend, as I know you do a little bit of talk. You'll talk about when you go to the gym or when you're out on a boat. You have pursuits that people want to hear about too, because they want to know the whole person. And it also helps a little bit with building rapport in a fairly short time frame, just to be able to be your whole self, right?
Absolutely.
Martin, I can't thank you enough. And thank you again for kind of sharing a little bit of a reboot or a little, tactic that people can consider when they're listening. And I've even started to adapt the practice after thinking about how you do it of simply removing any visual distractions when I'm trying to have a sales conversation. And it's made me better at qualifying people. And I feel ashamed that I, took so long to do something as simple as that. But I think that you set a tremendous example. And I just want to thank you again for being on the show.
I really appreciate you having me on. And again, what I talk about is nothing revolutionary. It's not groundbreaking. At the end of the day, it's listening, having a conversation, and just being the person that you are. You don't have to be a persona of someone else, right? Just be you. Do you.
Do you. Love it. All right. Well, that's all for today. And listener, if you like what you've heard today, please, feel free to check us out. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or whatever listening app you use. If you really want to catch the show notes, some of the things that we've mentioned today with Martin, look at our website at Funnel Reboot. Perhaps give us a quick review on iTunes. I just invite you to get in touch with us. And Martin, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way is to connect with me, follow me on LinkedIn. Martin MacArthur.
Last name is spelled
MacArthur, or you can search The Outbound Sales Guy.
That's right. All right. Well, listen, thanks again. And thank you again to everybody for listening.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.